𝗏𝗂𝗹𝗋, I'm 𝗤𝗏𝗂𝘃𝗋𝗀. In the first week of August, led by NCWC, we kicked off a nationwide campaign to eliminate violence against children. And today we're joined here by representatives from CSOs, RBP, and NCWC to talk about one of the 3 types of violence against children: sexual violence. So without delaying any further, let me welcome Program and Project Manager 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏 from ABS. We have Case Manager 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏 from National Lumpton, Principal Counselor 𝗩𝗶𝘂𝗹𝗏 from Renew, Lieutenant Colonel 𝗓𝗏𝗃𝗏 from RBP, Senior Program Officer 𝗓𝗏𝗃𝗏 from NCWC, and Counselor 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏 from DYS. Thank you so much for joining us, 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏. Before we discuss about sexual violence, let's actually understand what sexual violence is. So what is sexual violence?
Thank you for the opportunity. I think to talk about the sexual violence is something that is very difficult to talk and then think about this. But basically, the sexual violence is something that is of any sexual act, and then it is an attempt of an sexual act that led against a person with a coercions involved in that by anybody else. And I think sexual violence could happen in any way without, irrespective of any relationship to the victims. And this violence could happen in any settings, be it at home, in the community, in an educational institutions, or somewhere in the schools now. So for that, I think sexual violence is something that if we, other forms which we can explain is like somehow with like sexual exploitations, showing pornographic and then other, pictorial, images to our children. Rape could be one of the sexual violence against children, and then other illicit acts that are in sexual in nature. So that is what we feel that it's a sexual violence.
Yes. This whole campaign says it's elimination of violence against children. So who are we talking about, by the way? Children, so it's below 18. Mola. I'm trying to understand what sexual violence is. So who are the perpetrators and who are the victims usually?
Before we go to who are the victims, I think it's also really important to understand and know what how many cases have been reported to the police. So if you look at the statistics from 2020 to July 2022, we have 295 cases reported, and from amongst the 295 cases, 211 cases are cases where victims are children, and 84 is where the victims are adults. So if you look at the statistics, it shows clearly that children are victims of sexual violence.
Wow. So they're vulnerable as it is. And there's a lot of sexual violence is one of those gender-based violences, and it's evident from the stats law. Let me ask these questions to the counselors then. So what kind of children, what kind of trauma, what kind of wounds are we dealing with children? Not physical wounds, but because you're counselors, you've dealt with multiple victims, multiple survivors. Who are we dealing with here, La?
Yes, thank you, VBS, for this opportunity. When it comes to dealing with children affected by all this sexual abuse or violence, first of all, we need to remember that children, depending on the age, carry different types of trauma. Many a times, if the children are less than 5 years, they even do not know, you know, the crime perpetrated against them, because they do not know what is sex, right? And those children above 5 until 18 years, they carry a lot of trauma. It is seen from the faces they, you know, when they come to us seeking the services, the professional services. And we have to be very sensitive in dealing with children, because children are children. They do not understand the language of adults. We use the art therapy, the sign therapy, you know, in order to, you know, enable them to, you know, open to us. So that rapport building phase is so very important, you know, so that they can openly, you know, because it's very important for any professional counselors to know the mental status of a child. And accordingly, unless we understand the mental health, unless we examine their mental status, we cannot go about, you know, intervening what to do next. But whatever said and done, you know, we have to encourage, we have to, you know, we have to give, we have to deal in such a way, whatever said and done, we go by the best interest of the child, you know. So what is important for them, how do they see the world? And because it is so devastating, rape of any kind or sexual molestations, you know, or any kind of coercion, you know, is so devastating, because they carry that pain throughout their life. So a counselor should be very, very sensitive. They are specifically trained to deal with children law. And beyond that, we have to educate the parents, we have to educate any significant others, including teachers, you know, any caregivers, any service providers. Thank you.
I see. 𝗍𝗶𝘃𝗹𝗲 what are some of the ways you work with children law, especially who've gone through such traumatic experiences?
When it comes to sexual violence, like you have pointed out, it's more, you know, the physical symptoms are more very visible, but more than the physical symptoms, physical signs, I think, those survivors of sexual violence, they undergo a lot of psychological disturbance. So their mental state is actually put at stake, and they exhibit a kind of different behaviors after they have actually experienced the sexual violence. A few of the signs that is actually exhibited by those survivors is it's actually a sudden and unexpected behavior change. Suddenly that the survivor tends to show more interest in the sexual pornography and in the sexual activities. So this could be one sign. Another could be very overly affectionate, knowledgeable in a sexual way. And third thing could be suddenly they will isolate themselves from their normal circle of friends. They will isolate themselves, and then more so those survivors, they tend to show less interest in the normal activities that actually interest them. And the more physical things could be the medical problems like stomach pain, and then the itching, and then the very visible thing is that the STIs and then the pregnancies. So these are some of the signs. And very invisible yet very important thing that sexual violence survivors actually exhibit is they tend to have a lot of guilt in them, because they feel that whenever they are abused, it always feels that it's my own, I have actually asked for it. So they always look back and then they feel that, okay, it's because of my previous karma. So they don't think that someone has actually abused them, but more so they think that, okay, because of my previous karma, I deserve this kind of treatment. That's one thing.
It's very true. Like, guilt is something, no matter how young a child is, however they were exploited, they manage to carry that. And it's one of the reasons that the child is hindered from speaking out about it. And talking about children, we have extra vulnerable children, which are children living with disability. How do we make sure that they are safeguarded? How do we make sure that they are protected?
When it comes to children with disabilities, generally, children in general, they are very vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, but more so when it comes to children with disabilities, they're more vulnerable. And as per the global review, children with disabilities are almost 3 to 4 times more likely to experience sexual violence or any other form of violence compared to children without disabilities. So in that case, we know the importance how we should also cater to the needs of children with disabilities. And we are talking about implementing a campaign on ending violence against children, which also includes children with disabilities. And then I think when it comes to children with disabilities, they don't really know that if you talk about good and bad touch, they don't have the ability to distinguish between what's good and what's bad touch. So in that case, we should really intervene. And then there's a lot of stigma and discrimination attached to it, and there's also ignorance. And then they don't really get support because they have a disability. So I think this is the right time that all the stakeholders come together, and we are also living in an era where we believe in leaving no one behind. So I think we also cater to their needs as far as violence is concerned, not only sexual violence but any other form of violence. We should be always protecting them from this violence issue. And when it comes to interventions, we can always create awareness to the caregivers, family, parents, and the stakeholders alike to come forward and then support, protect children from being exploited and abused sexually.
Yes, thank you.
Not only when it comes to the disability, not only the global scenario, but it is also reflected, clearly reflected in our violence against children study in 2016, which found out that children with disabilities are more vulnerable to violence, especially sexual and emotional violence. So in that concern, what we wanted to advocate to our parents, caregivers, and then children is that they should be able to come up and then stand up for the and then speak up what is against their rights, and then also we need to come up with the facilities and then services to making sure that they get the support services required.
I see. Thank you.
Well, I think while we say that we need to speak up, and I think when it comes to children with disability, one of the experiences that I'd like to share is in terms of RBP's capacity, in terms of identifying these children with disability, when cases come to the police station. We've had a case where this young girl is 17 years old and she had run away from home. And when we investigated the case, we found out that her intellectual development was not that of even a 12-year-old. So even though we say rape of a child above 12 years, according to the law, because she is 17, when we look at the intellectual development, if you have the capacity to identify, and that's where we realize within the RBP that we also need to train our law enforcement officials in identifying such victims or survivors. So there's a lot of work to be done.
And I think it's good to see that, EVAC, the campaign that we kicked off is already a multi-pronged, multi-sectoral initiative. And it's good that we're here from different departments, different sectors coming together to actually talk about this. I want to direct my next question to 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. How different is 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏's work when compared to the other councillors?
Well, thank you for having me and for this opportunity to speak about sexual violence on behalf of children and our team. It's nothing different for 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. Of course, we have been receiving a lot of cases, especially that sexual violence. So far, since 2018 till June 2022, the administrative data maintained with 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, RENEW and NCWC, that 14%, in total 134 cases were reported on sexual violence cases. And 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, usually whenever we receive such cases, the sexual violence, we respond based on the guiding risk level guide and case prioritization guide. If case falls under high risk, if case is high risk, we respond within 24 hours. And if case is medium risk, and we respond within 2 to 3 days. And likewise, if case is low risk, falls under low risk, then we respond within 5 to 7 days.
Yes. And I'm trying to understand this. We have RENEW, NCWC, we have 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, we have DUIS. And they're all, in some ways or the other, counseling children who are survivors of sexual violence. How do you decide which child goes where? Or who decides that? Which child goes under which umbrella to be counseled?
So see, it is like this in the case of Renew. So we have as you may be aware, we have a community, based volunteers, CVSS volunteers spread across 20 Jonghaks. So if they come across, a child has been, abused, and they contact the secretariat, the headquarters, and of course they will try to intervene at their own level. But if it is beyond, if it is of a sexual abuse, it's a crime, and there is little we can do, because it's a crime. Not reporting a crime is a crime itself. So we report to the concerned agencies like RBP, even to Royal Court of Justice, and yes, then if it needs shelter services, we have one, and we have a safe spaces now. It has already been established in a place like a Bumthang, Paro, and Chirang, and recent one is in Punakhala. So we're spreading la. So yes, but when it comes to the referral, it is our volunteers who usually refers, and sometimes walk-in clients.
So given that we have a lot of centers where counseling for survivors of sexual violence happens, I'm wondering, how do these cases get referred to these centers?
In addition to Samtin's points, the National Commission for Women and Children have developed the SOP, Standard Operating Procedure for Child Protection Case Management, where each of the cases will be assigned to a case manager, and that's how the case manager will be taking through the process of the survivors, be it sexual and other violence. So that's how the referral will actually take place. If the survivor needs a shelter, it will reflect to Renew and Najin Lamtin and other sectors. And then if the survivor needs special attentions, then it will be reflected to our Ability Bhutan Society. If the survivor requires counseling and all, it will also reflect to the Ministry of Education, particularly Department of Youth and Sports, and then other CSOs such as Renew and all. And then we also do the referral for the medical and then other checkups also, that the case manager will take it based on the need of the survivors. So it is clearly there, and then that's how we actually collaborate with all the partners, especially in ensuring that our children are protected and safe.
You wanted to add?
Like Sir mentioned, preventing and responding to the violence is a collective approach. And as illustrated in the socio-ecological model, that it is the collective, the center, child-centered approach is necessary to to secure the well-being and the safety of the children. And whenever the case, like Knilson mentioned, it depends on nature of the cases and the varying needs of the cases. And if case required a shelter service, that before Najlamti we don't have shelter home. Now we have shelter home, and before we used to refer to Renew. And if child needs a counseling service, we refer to the professional counselors. And likewise, it depends on the needs of the cases the response should be.
Before we had this notion that dangers and these sexual violences happened outside of home during the dark by strangers. But I feel like from the facts we know that there's a different truth behind it, that sexual violence can happen anywhere. So where does it happen, and who are these perpetrators? Are they really strangers?
As per records with the RBP, amongst the 295 cases, if you look at who are the perpetrators, it is people known to the victim or the survivor. So 229 cases were known, and I think 66 were strangers. So amongst the 229 cases that were reported, they were family members. So when you talk about referral, that's when we face the challenge of removing the child from the family, and that's that way in terms of working together. I think as RPP cannot work in isolation. We need to work together with the other agencies. We refer our cases to NCWC, to the protection officers, for psychosocial support.
And a lot of these victims are girls.
Yes. Majority of the victims or the survivors are girls. So amongst the, when you look at statistics again, 2020 to July 2022, there's only 3 male child who were sexually abused as compared to the rest of the case. So majority is young girls.
Yes. And the stats that Lieutenant Colonel here reported, these are only reported cases, Mola, and there are so many cases that go unreported. There is also this notion that before, these things never happened because they were barely reported. But the cases are increasing. Why do you think that is? Why do we have increasing number of cases?
So see, if I may intervene, it is not that sexual abuse was, sexual violence was not there in the past. It was there. It was there. It was very much there. But because it is such a contentious issues, they are being stigmatized. Everything used to be brushed under the carpet. Now, because of these advocacy programs, awareness program, people know about the laws. People know that at least it's a crime. So that is why we get more reportings, we get more reporting. That is why this number is increasing. Now, yes, going by the stats, going by the research, the literature, sexual abuse compared to other kind of abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse, these are very, very less. But what is important here to mention, to remember is we are not dealing with the numbers. We are talking about the people who are one single child. We are talking about one single child who has been affected. When he or she carries that pain and suffering throughout her life, and because so, as I mentioned, is so, far-reaching. We have to stop. We have to. That is why it's very important. Every stakeholder, every sensible, responsible citizens, should come forward and put a full stop to this, because we cannot afford to lose one child through suicide, through addictions, through any kind of trauma. You talk about, mental disorders, it is that devastating.
There is always a risk that children with disabilities are going to be abused or exploited because of the fact that they have a disability. And the perpetrators, they deem children with disabilities an easy target because of the fact that they have a disability again, and then they cannot report the crime they have committed. So I think there will be increasing number of cases pertaining to children with disabilities. If the stats doesn't show otherwise, it's because, as you mentioned, it might not be unreported or it's unreported, but there's always a risk that children with disabilities are going to be abused. And as Lieutenant Colonel also mentioned, that the perpetrators are the ones who are known to the victims or survivors of violence. So I think in that case, when it comes to children with severe disabilities, those who are especially dependent on their caregivers, I think they are more vulnerable because they have to depend on the caregivers, starting from giving a shower to grooming them. So I think they are totally dependent. So when it comes to children with disabilities in general, it's very vulnerable, but even more so to those children with severe disabilities who are totally dependent on the caregivers. So I think they have the high risk of being exploited.
Yes, wow.
Children in difficult circumstances and orphan and neglected, abandoned children, they are also the easy prey to sex trafficking and exploitation. And one thing is, I think, because of the lack of the knowledge on the early identification and safe referral child protection system, and also lack of the existing services and the appropriate referral mechanism. Maybe as a result of this, there is the cases, child protection concern cases are widespread, unreported, and extremely damaging to the lives of children. And also that the scars of sexual violence and the psychological distress can affect the child's the development and the ability to learn and health. Maybe one of the key factors is that the social tolerance and acceptance of sexual violence. And the sexual violence and exploitation the people perceive as normal, and it's beyond the control of communities. And which alongside, because of the shame, fear, threats, and belief that nobody can help, even if they report to the concerned authorities, result in the low reporting of cases to the concerned authorities.
There's a lot more tolerance and acceptance culturally more. Yes.
It is very, it gives me this opportunity to clear so many misconceptions on the school counseling program in schools. Because initially when the Minister of Education was trying to establish the school counseling program in schools, and when so many cases actually came into surface, then we had this acquisition from various stakeholders that ever since we have placed school counselors in schools, then school counselors actually acted as a catalyst, and they are the ones who actually invite a lot of problems. So we actually, not in a defensive way, but we are actually explaining now, because of the school counselors, there is a person, there is a professional who is actually looking after this, who is actually trained and who can handle these kind of issues. So when so much advocacy, when so much awareness programs are actually conducted in schools, children are aware of this kind of services, whom to avail this kind of services, whom do they actually approach, where do they actually seek help. Because of all these services now made available, then they know, okay, now I have a counselor or I have a principal, I can directly go in and talk with him. So because of the services made available, cases are only increasing. It's not because someone has come there and then someone has implanted all these issues. So now my message to whoever is viewing, or my message to the whole Bhutan is, if we can advocate more, if we can come forward and then raise your voice that, okay, I am being abused or my children is actually being abused, things are going to be helped and sorted out. Otherwise, if your ward or if your daughter, whoever it may be, is abused, and if you kind of aloof yourself and keep it silent, if the perpetrator is your own family member, and if you're going to hide him or save him, it's only going to perpetuate. It's only going to increase. So I think now it's high time we come forward, seek help. There are so many services available. So come forward, seek help, and then make this, ending evac a very successful one.
Yes, let's
because we
end
don't
it.
want any child, we don't want any children to actually experience any forms of violence, be it sexual or be it, forget about sexual, but any forms of violence cannot be actually tolerated. So that's the message we actually want to give.
The schools have played a very, very important role, and we have to commend the work done by them in identifying the victims, and then they forward the cases to us.
Yes.
So I think
the children are finding finding out that they can trust their teachers or their counselors, and there's been a setup for the convenience of the child to comfortably report it, and I think that is so reassuring for the children who are actually going through it. So I think I asked this question earlier but never got around to answering it. Where does this happen?
From our statistics, the RBP statistics, mostly in the homes by people known to them. Yes.
So this adds extra responsibility to the parents.
Parents, caregivers. I think responsibility falls on everybody, the whole community, because when we talk about such cases, it's not like people don't know about it. And most cases, what we've realized with our experience investigating such cases is people know, but then it is not their problem. So what from the RBP's perspective is really important for everybody to join hands, and it should be zero tolerance, and we encourage people to come forward and report such cases. And if you want to be anonymous, you can be anonymous. For example, if you have a neighbor and you are aware that there's a child abuse case there, you can let us know, and nobody has to know that you're the one who lodged the complaint to us.
Oh, that's nice.
My message to the children in particular and the public at large, that whenever that you are going through or facing the sexual violence, please, the dear children, please stand up against any act of sexual violence or any incident, the form of sexual violence. Speak up and don't be silent. Raise your voice and reach out to the organization like 𝗦𝗲𝘃𝗋𝗋, NCWC for help, or to ability services. You can call on 1098 for NCWC, and RBP on 113, and for 𝗦𝗲𝘃𝗋𝗋 1257. And always remember that you are not alone, and we are there for you. And you should share your concerns and worries to whom you trust. Thank you.
I think your message is going to be well received to by a lot of children, and especially those who are dealing with this at home, by their loved ones, by their uncles, grandpas, parents, stepfathers. Yeah, I think we have kind of touched up on this too. Who is responsible to make sure that the children are safe? Who's responsible?
I think when it comes to the sexual violence and then other types of violence, I think it is very important that we should understand that prevention is something that we really have to focus or take it as one of the priority, because children who are sexually abused tend to be socially isolated, tends to suffer from mental health issues. Then they might attempt or commit suicide, and then other issues such as they might develop more dependencies on alcohol and drugs, and then which will really impact the children's life to become a very fruitful adult. So that is why it is very important for our parents, caregivers, all the duty bearers that we are responsible to uphold the right of right holder, particularly the child. That as a parent and the caregivers, we should always understand and learn the signs, risks, and warning signs that our children are facing, especially on the sexual violence, because children will not actually. It's quite difficult for them to open up, and then as a priority, as a protective factors that we need to initiate is that we need to understand the warning signs, so that prevention and then other measures could be taken place. So that is why it is very important that parents should know and then how to keep our children safe and protected.
Yes. I think in terms of prevention, it just doesn't fall on one institution or just the parents. I think it falls on everybody, the community, and I think crime prevention is a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play, and I think social norms, even about the bystanders approach, where you feel, oh, it didn't happen to me, so it's not my business. I think it's time we change that.
I see. Yes, true. Did anyone else? Yes.
Yeah. I think now this question: whose responsibility is it to actually end violence against children? This is much sought after, I think, question. Many are actually answering. Okay, in medias, everywhere. I think it's. We can see that so many comments and then so many posts on, okay, who is responsible for ending violence against children. So I was just thinking, and then it's very nicely written. I think it needs a village to raise a child. So I think it's not an individual task. It's not an individual responsibility, but it's firstly, I think it's the individual responsibility of the children to learn these resilience skills and how to keep themselves safe. Secondly, I think it's the responsibility of the parents and caregivers, wherever they are, whoever they are, irrespective of what kind of business, what kind of work, what kind of activities they are engaged in. I think it's very important to give ample time, quality time with their children. Thirdly, I think it's the government of the day, the policies, laws safeguarding the rights of the children. I think we also need to look at this. And so overall, I think it's the whole community that the children live in. So each one of us have all this big responsibility to save and then end violence against children.
I think from the 𝗏𝗏𝗏's perspective, we really encourage early reporting, because the challenge that we face while we investigate cases is when cases are reported very late, then there are no evidences, and then when we have to accuse the perpetrators based on lack of evidence. So we'd like to earnestly request the people watching the program to, if you are aware, please do report as early as you can.
Yes.
When it comes to the responsibility, it's more or less the same what other members have mentioned. But as I mentioned earlier, we all have committed to leaving no one behind. So let us all stand by what we have committed, and let us all work together because together we can make a difference.
True, very true. We have the whole nation here. We have the whole government, we have the CSOs, and we have the RBP here, making sure that our children are safe, our children get the childhood, the peaceful, non-violent childhood that they deserve. But at the end, before the crime happens, I think it's the responsibility of everyone watching this, whether you are a parent or not, anybody. If you have children around you, it's our responsibility to make sure that our children are safe. And on that note, I thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you for watching.